It's also understanding that customer journey and what are the key milestones as an organization that shows that they're being successful and really leaning in to help the customer achieve those outcomes. So then advocacy just kind of follows, right? Like advocacy can never be an afterthought. It's always a team sport. And I think that's why I found myself in positions of building life cycle programs, building adoption within that adoption, onboarding, growth, because it's not in a silo.
Welcome to the PR Bound Podcast. I'm your host, Sunny Manivanan. Joining me today is a very special guest, Brittnee Dawson, who is a seasoned customer marketing leader, having experience at companies like AlphaSense, Experity, Anaplan, and many more. I'm so excited to have you, Brittnee. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Sunny. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for the chat.
Great. Well, listen, so you started your career at Thomson Reuters, which is a big company, and you were a marketer there. And then you moved into software as a service companies, and you moved into customer marketing. Tell me a little bit about what pulled you into customer marketing specifically, and do you still use some of the skill sets you learned in your early career roles?
Yeah, it's interesting how your career evolves over time, right? So like I went to school for film and that was kind of my original life goal was like to make documentaries and using that as a visual medium to tell people stories, right? Like that's what's at my core and that's kind of why I started where I started was working within Thomson Reuters to connect those legal stories. And I think throughout that experience, I gained some marketing knowledge and best practices as you continue throughout your career. And then through that, as I was learning a little bit about the product management side as well as the marketing side, really understanding that I loved how to highlight individuals and how to truly connect to solve people's problems and how to use that through others' experiences and creating that community element along the way, right? So I think that's kind of why I am who I am and where I am today is understanding that I just, one, I'm a very visual person and like that creative outlet, but as well, human centricity on how to connect individuals to the larger ecosystem and communities to highlight their expertise and accomplishments.
Amazing. So you were
Yeah.
a storyteller from the very beginning, whether it was
Yeah.
through film or other forms of storytelling. Has telling stories changed materially over the last, let's say, decade in your view? What makes for a great story? Has that changed over time?
Oh, very interesting question, right? Since like, as we know, the elephant in the room, AI is changing everything, right? So I
It only
think
took us 3 minutes to talk about
3 minutes to talk about AI.
AI.
That's
we
amazing.
tried. We tried.
We tried. We went straight for it. No, and I think like the humans are humans, right? Like you think about the psychology that goes into all of this. We want to connect with others. We want to understand and build that trust and feel validated and making the decisions that we want to make and have support along the way as we are executing things. So to answer your question, yeah, I think it's always been the same. How we get that information or how we collect that information, how we share that information, that's what's changing. And that's the complex aspect of the strategies that we have to do as marketers at B2B SaaS companies.
Totally. When you stepped into your first customer marketing role, did you know what you were getting into? Like, what was that job? What was that job description? What did you actually end up doing in that job? And how much did you know about that going into it?
Oh, it's funny because it's always one of those classics like, how did I get here? Like
Yes, yes.
it's like the market evolved, the jobs have evolved, I have evolved as a human being myself. So I think I discovered it along the way, honestly. And just like that first job was like, okay, all right, let's like figure out how to do this. Let's connect with others. I think that's what's amazing about the customer marketing community itself is like we practice what we preach and we help each other out. So really leaning into the network across many organizations across the world to help figure out how to do it. And then it's like continuing to advancing and learning. I'm a big believer in always learning and always adapting and always changing and growing with it. So I think it's incredibly cool where the customer marketing role has gone and how it's evolving. And it's also kind of fun because some of us are just really trying to make it. We all don't have it figured out, but I think it's a strong community to help kind of figure it out together.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you because your career has now spanned different sort of categories or industries within software, right? Across Anaplan, Experity, AlphaSense, and more. You've covered so many different categories. What is different about different customer marketing in different categories, or is it just kind of, is great customer marketing the same regardless of the space? Does the playbook change? How has that evolved for you?
It's the same. And I think that's where, when you have conversations with other industries or other personas, it's, well, this one doesn't have approval. We'll never get approval on this one, or they engage this way, or they like to engage that way, or this is how they use our product. And kind of where this conversation has been and where it's going is it's all humans, right? Like they all have stories to tell, they all want to connect. I think how you find that information is different between different industries and different products. So it's just trying to understand what is that overall customer life cycle? What is their journey? What's the experience with them as the humans in your brand, how they engage with other customers as well. That's what's a little different. But once you figure that out and truly put yourself in the customer's shoes and understand their perspective, the way to get there is very similar.
That's interesting. So you're effectively saying, hey, everybody thinks they're a unique snowflake, but ultimately we're all just snowflakes, and we're more similar than we are different, at least in customer
Yeah.
marketing, in customer marketing land.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how you collect that information too. And so it's kind of understanding where those engagement channels are, if that is within a community, if that is in a review site, if that is within an app, just trying to figure out where the customer engages with your brand and like how to collect that information and understand their experience. Then that data becomes power. And that's where your advocacy can not just be an afterthought, it can continue to excel within the overall life cycle of that customer journey.
Yeah, incredible. Tell me a little bit about how the role itself has changed, especially in the last, let's say, 2 to 4 years. I will use the AI word now. AI is now here. It's no longer just a side project or a hobby. I think people are doing or trying to do real things, or at the very least, they're being asked by their leadership to do real things. That much I think we can all
Yep.
agree on. What does that change about this function? And what kind of stays the same? I agree with you completely that ultimately human beings are human beings, and the way we interact with each other, frankly, isn't changing that much from what I can tell. But perhaps how we go make these connections is changing. But what have you seen in your world with AI now coming into these jobs?
Yeah. We all are like data analysts all of a sudden, right? Like we all have to understand like what's all the data across the business that we have on a user and understand like how do we manufacture that into a strategy that we can execute some programs against. But what is also ultimately the thread that we have to remember in the customer marketing world is we're dealing with humans. So it's how to like use the data and all that information that's within the technology marketing tech stack or even adoption frameworks, what have you. How do we use that data to still connect to the humans? And so I think that's the biggest thing is changing is we need to scale, we need to move fast, but how do we continue to advocate for the customers who are humans and make it a personalized experience for them and not lose it within all the AI? So I think that's what we're challenged with is how to scale, but also make it personable at the same time.
Yes, 100%. Can I ask you for a specific example of something that you're proud of, like where you had a customer interaction or a customer relationship that you built over time? Would love to hear a story of something that you're proud of on that front.
Yeah, I think it's we'll name drop Purebound here. Purebound ultimately became a really good resource at AlphaSense. Go read my story, everyone. And go read the case study. I think there was being able to help identify people and work with the revenue organization on how do we amplify that user even more. If it's like the initial test was like, here, let's just involve them in the beta of a release that's coming. All right, we had this feedback call. Purebound found the awesome quotes from that. All right, let's connect with that person. And then that person becomes a speaker on a webinar or become, I'm trying to think this exact person I'm thinking of. I think it was a webinar or the user conference. I'm trying to remember. And so it's the catalyst to like building those deeper relationships. And also it it helped build connections with the revenue organization because it's a little bit of sometimes it can be fishing or hunting for those customers. But if you utilize that technology to understand like this is the opening the door to a bigger story, I think that is a really cool evolution to like starting with technology, but then kind of ending with the human in the long run.
Yeah. No, it's cool. I think what you're alluding to, which is part of what we're trying to do, is using technology to get to building those relationships more effectively and faster. And just what are the right relationships that you want to build to advance your company and what you're trying to achieve, rather than spending all your time fishing really for information to even figure out who I want to build that relationship with from a customer perspective.
Yeah, and it's also understanding that customer journey and what are the key milestones as an organization that shows that they're being successful and really leaning in to help the customer achieve those outcomes. So then advocacy just kind of follows, right? Like advocacy can never be an afterthought. It's always a team sport. And I think that's why I found myself in positions of building life cycle programs, building adoption within that adoption, onboarding, growth because it's not in a silo. And that's where advocacy just has to be a natural fit into, okay, hey, we're launching this beta. Let's have them see the adoption. Okay, then we build that relationship so that they can be a speaker for us. So it's always in the roles that I have put myself in, it's always fully understanding that life cycle and finding those moments of advocacy along the way and using the tech to support that scalability of it.
Cool. Well, you talked about a couple of threads that I want to go deeper into. One of which is this idea of life cycle design and advocacy fitting into it, as opposed to just being a thing that you try to optimize for. Which I think a lot of companies, by the way, do fall into that trap. Is they say they get 100 customers, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, let's go get some case studies, and that's where it all begins. But really, it's part of a bigger picture of how do you go really expand that relationship with that customer, which I would say for most companies is at an all-time high right before you sign the deal. And then you
Mm.
sign the deal, and it's like, all right, you're like shipped off to an entirely different team. And now you're in the nitty-gritty of having to onboard something and get value out of something. But most companies don't design lifecycle in a very thoughtful way. What's your take on all of this, and where does advocacy even fit in?
Yeah, I think I've always tried to understand what the customer journey is. So having that really strong relationship with customer success, with the sales organization, with training and education, with implementation, like whoever's supporting the customer, what is the customer team, and understanding how they engage with the customer and kind of understanding the tools that they use to monitor that and understand what are the key milestones if that's a QBR, if that's an adoption milestone, if that's a user expansion or referral that they're trying to get, trying to understand what is their strategies and how they do customer support, and then finding those milestones on where advocacy can come into that and using those measurements. So if you're helping with those, then advocacy kind of just naturally comes, right? And it's truly inevitable that if the customer achieves their outcomes, if the sales team and the customer success team internally feel that the customer is successful, then advocacy is just like an easy add-on and you've built that trust, right? Like trust is like the most critical thing within all this evolution. So I've been in positions where I'm helping amplify onboarding, helping on expansion strategies, helping with adoption flows and creating that connection between marketing and the in-app experience, right? So I think that's where you find opportunities to say, hey, leave a review, or this is reach this milestone. Okay, let's go see if that triggers another advocacy activity. It's all this interconnected situations, and you just have to have that awareness to what the external customer experience is so that you can build those advocacy motions.
Totally. You talked about
Yep.
trust, and I think we're all, or at least I don't know about we're all, but I'm certainly feeling that we are playing some games with trust using AI as an excuse in some ways. Because, and what I mean by that is I think we're inserting this technology into all these situations that are human. Previously, were completely human to human. And I think there's a lot of companies that are so AI forward that they forget to make sure that the customers still trust them. And they end up creating this trust deficit at times throughout the cycle. Where have you seen, like, let me ask you the both sides of the question is when what can a company do to make its customers or to help its customers trusted more? And what are behaviors that a company engages in that erode trust with its customers? What have you seen in your career?
Yeah. I'm going to start with the latter part of that. So the road
Sure.
trust is like siloed experiences, right? Like here, this is what the billing experience is. This is what the support experience is. And then, hey, marketing's going to invite you to a webinar and an event, but you just raised multiple tickets and you're not getting your answers, right? So externally, the customer sees one company. And so it's how do you ensure that you're engaging with that customer in the right way to build that trust. And so I think that's where you need to ensure, right? It comes back to data. All the systems are talking to each other and like the data is clean, which I know I haven't worked at a company that it's ever had any of those things. So I know it's a
Totally.
challenge anywhere, right? So to help build that trust is kind of bringing awareness across the organization to this is what I'm sharing with the customer, this is what I'm sending the customer, and ensuring that like the messaging is clear, everyone's aware of those touch points, if that is an executive stakeholder or if that's a a champion user, right? Just having that clarity across the organization is critical. And then how you build that trust is you've amplified their experience. They want to become stickier with you. They want to have better experiences. They want to tell their friends and their colleagues, and they want to be shiny to their boss to say, like, I use this technology to do my job better or help the business succeed. And then they naturally become advocates. And then customer marketers just have fireworks everywhere, right? Like,
Exactly.
yay.
Exactly. That's the best
Yeah.
part of the job is when you already are
Yeah.
talking to a happy customer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
So it's like every time you publish a case study, you want to like hit the gong, right? Like sales team hits a gong for a closed opportunity. We want to hit a gong for um, a new case study for
I
sure.
love that. I love that idea. And yeah, we're moving to a new office at Peerbound. And one of the investments we're going to make is a real gong
I love that.
for the first time. And we absolutely will celebrate new deals, renewals, customer stories. Anytime a customer does something great with the product, those are the
Yeah.
outcomes that we care about. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies would be well served to go do that as well. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
Let me ask, the other thread that you brought up was this idea of enabling a sales team and enabling revenue teams. How has that changed, Brittnee, in the last decade? Like, in the early roles, was that even a part of the customer marketer's remit? And, I know more recently you obviously taken that, on and done it very successfully. What's been the history of sales enablement and customer marketing's relationship with sales enablement in your time in the function?
Yeah. I think it's evolved as like the sales cycle and the buyer trends and buyer what's the word I'm looking for? Buyer behaviors have been changing as well, right? So I think we used to think like, oh, hey, we can provide a quote at really top of funnel awareness type of activity. And then, hey, to close, we're going to do a reference call. So I think what has enabled customer marketing to do more enabling is having that always on and like activity of customer validation throughout the life cycle, right? And we know that buyers are doing a lot of research before they even contact a company, right? So how do we ensure that advocacy is out there in the world before we even know that they're interested? So I think what has evolved is how to ensure that we have advocacy at every stage of the sales cycle and making sure that it's not something that's just an add-on thought. It's not something that just happens when it needs to like is requested, but is naturally part of the sales cycle. And I think that's one thing cool about PeerBound is like we're able to not just build a content library, you're able to like enable the organization at the right time to make it part of their muscle of engaging and following up with a prospect or a customer expansion, what have you. So I think that's what has changed is that it's not a content library. It's putting it there easily, if that is on demand in a Slack channel, or if that's an email that gets it to them right after a phone call to show that validation. I think that's what's changed
Yeah,
is the
totally.
speed.
Totally. Yeah, I think, one of the concepts that even so, Peerbound is now 2 years and change old. And one of the things that we've talked about internally is like, hey, some of the stuff that we built even 2 years ago, like we can do a lot better. And I think a couple of years ago, we all thought, okay, AI's promise is really to act as a co-pilot to all of us. And now I think we're of the belief that, okay, there are some things that AI can do in a completely self-driving way that actually leads to good outcomes for the people and the company. And one of these things is, you mentioned this idea of a content library as being completely obsolete. I couldn't agree more. I think as a former head of product marketing, I'm like, hey, nobody was going to Highspot or Seismic. And we were all counting on sales reps to go to these places where we put all our stuff, whether it's product marketing or customer marketing. And this, that was just never happening. And I would look at
Yeah.
these usage stats, and just it would blow my mind how little usage there was of these sort of one-stop shops, so to speak. And I think there's no one-stop shop anymore. I think the one-stop is like wherever is in front of your sales reps' eyeballs. And I'm like, our competition isn't other SaaS companies. I'm like, look, my competition is like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, the news,
Yep.
media. I'm like, I'm competing against that. And I think everybody that's working should be very, very clear and say, look, the competition, whether you're enabling a sales team or you're doing work yourself, isn't just like, yeah, like, of course the rep's going to go to Highspot. I'm like, no, they're not. I'm like, that never happened, even when we didn't have all these distractions. And now you got to
Yeah.
be right in front of them at the moment where they need to take the next action. And frankly, you need to even tell them, like, here's what I would do if I were you. And do you like click to approve? I'm like, that's where we are. That's where the status quo is today. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of legacy software vendors, I'm like, man, you guys are in a world of hurt, because this is not what the sort of thought process mental model was, 10 years ago, or heck, even 3 years ago.
Yeah, and it's not even like having that library. It's like, how do I get the information to me in the way I want it with what I need, right? So like Peer to Bound does a great job of saying like, okay, you just had a call in this sector with this type of opportunity for this product, and that's what we're personalizing that information to. So kind of like to an earlier point, everything is changing, that's faster, but we truly want it how my brain is processing it,
Yes.
and you need to figure that out.
Yes.
Right? So it's like,
100%.
okay, how do we get in that salesperson's mind to understand, okay, this is the current pain point they have, and this is the customer information that can be delivered to help them with that. And so, again, this is where like data and systems coming together to help us make it even more personalized is truly what's going to make customer marketing have a big seat at the table.
100%. And I'll
Yeah.
say one last thing on this topic, which is that every time we have automated something to like the 90% or 95% rate, the immediate feedback request from customers is like, this is great. Can you go the other 5 to 10% and just like fully automate this thing for me? And we're like, yeah, but don't you want to look at this and review this? And I think especially when it comes to sales enablement, the feature request that we get, and this is where we're building in the near future, is, hey, like, don't just give the rep the information, like basically write the email for them. And
Yeah.
great that they get it after the call. Like, do it before the call too. The after call
Yeah.
email is wonderful, but like, Monday morning emails that say, here's what you got coming up this week, and here's what we think you need to say on the call to go help your win rate, increase in that deal. And they're like, you guys know this better than we do. Just tell us what we need to say. And I think, this run is happening faster than I thought it would. Where we are
Hmm.
now, I think there's a core group of us, especially in the software industry, because we're all tech early adopters, right? I think there's a pretty core group of us that are all saying, okay, like, I get this technology now, help me like automate things, like take things off my plate completely. And I think that's the next wave. People call it agentic, whatever. But I hate these buzzwords. But I think the promise and the requirement is now, okay, let's go fully autonomous, and do it correctly, but help me get these things off my plate completely, is what the bar is.
Yeah. And the challenge we have with all of that is like, okay, I can write the sales email for you, but buyers are also getting smarter to know that that was AI, right? So again, it goes back to that human connection. How do we continue to drive scale with
Yes.
AI and create that personalization with that human connection? And how do
Yes.
you get on a meeting, feel empowered to create that connection, or write that email or write that Slack message that truly connects and in the right tone? So
Yes.
it's not easy. I don't have an answer for you, but I'm just kind of
No.
saying like it still comes back to the human. Like as AI evolves, we're also gonna, as humans, become aware of what is AI versus what's not. It tricks you sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
um yeah, and it's going back to like kind of that entire life cycle of understanding like how is that human engaging with your brand, engaging with your product, and how do you naturally evolve to having them become your advocates. And I think that's where customer marketers have a strategic advantage is we're like human-centric individuals so that we can utilize the AI in a human first way. And I think
Totally.
that's going to be the critical strategic advantage we have as customer marketing
Totally.
continues to evolve.
Well, in what you're talking about, just how humans operate, is bringing up one more thought, which is you and I have both written things using AI and gotten its assistance and help. And there's a spectrum of, I remember for sure, I still take notes by hand. And, I still write in a physical notebook,
Oh,
which
I have a
I'm
notebook
like,
right here. Yeah.
I'm like, God, nothing says you're old than having a notebook and a pen in 2026. But I swear to you, I think it helps me remember things better when I
Yeah.
physically write something down and I take the time with my slow handwriting to go write the stuff down. And then I look at it and I say, huh. And then I remember it way better the next day than just typing something on my computer. And I mean, the end of the spectrum is like basically if you're using AI to write something, I'm like, there's no recollection of this stuff at all. Like,
Yeah.
I don't remember any of the stuff that AI has generated for me. And,
Yeah.
I think again, I'm not a neuroscientist. This is way beyond my area of expertise, but I do know myself. I watch my own behavior and I try to observe it fairly closely to see what am I doing that's working, what's not working. And using AI, I think, is good for speed, but it's not necessarily good for retention.
Hmm.
And I think there is a sort of breaking point for human beings of like how much benefit can we get out of this if like you're trying to again count on you're trying to hold the human accountable, for end results. And yes, you're also saying, yeah, you say I go do all these things. I'm like, there is a limit at which the human has to say, okay, I need to take on this, even though this thing could do it for me. And I don't think
Yeah.
we've really thought through those implications just yet as a society, and definitely not as professionals.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting about like the tech stack all these companies have is there's a lot of data, there's a lot of systems. We can create workflows, we can create playbooks. I have this text right in there for you. It can send the LinkedIn message. But what's really unique about customer marketing is like we try to create the ultimate customer experience and life cycle, right? But where the advocacy play comes in, it is telling that story. And data is never going to tell, hey, this made me feel really awesome, this helped me solve this business problem, this helped me advance my career, this company changed my life, those type of stories that
Yes.
advocacy is trying to dig for. I might be naive because I'm passionate about it, but like I don't think AI can replace that. And what it can help is how to amplify humans to put that out in the world, right? If it's
Yeah.
writing a review, if it's supporting a business by writing a case study, I think, you know, that's where it's gonna like amplify, but in the end, humans are humans.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think we're again at the very early stages of watching all of us interact with this basically incredible technology and see what is actually possible versus what is just hopes and dreams at this point.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think the one thing that someone told me recently is you can't hold a computer accountable for results. And therefore, it can never really manage like entire systems of things and like deliver results.
Hmm.
And I think there are some people trying to challenge that assumption and saying, look, like if I set an objective function to a Claude code and say, yeah, go build me a business that generates $100,000 a month, maybe you can do that in the future. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe, but
Yeah.
can it? Like, are we just
Yeah.
is this just science fiction or are we actually doing this stuff? But anyway, these are the
Yeah.
kinds of questions that these are not just extra credit questions. These are questions that we are working through at the moment in March 2026, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and one thing I challenge myself to as I try to become as AI forward as I can be with the time that I
Yep.
have is how do you apply that to the business challenges
Yes.
of, right? So understanding, okay, AI can understand this usage. Okay, we can implement this NPS survey or do XYZ survey, collect text qualitative feedback from the customer via the survey, then it can automatically create a customer story for us. But then it's like, now what? Now what do you do? And then kind of going back to this enablement conversation, or how do you put it in demand gen growth efforts to like, or PR efforts? That's still where customer marketing can thrive too, is how to use that information to apply it to help the business succeed. And I think that's what I try to challenge myself to is like, okay, this is what we were trying to solve for. This is the resources I have to support my business and solving those challenges. So
Totally.
yeah, we could probably go on and on, Sunny,
I know.
about what this is, where this is going, and I don't have a
No, it's,
crystal ball. I don't know if you do, but it'll be
no, I
interesting to
mean,
see where everything goes.
yeah, we certainly have our point of view, but I don't think some days I'm super optimistic about all of this. And other days I'm still optimistic, but a little bit more cautious about where this is all going to end up. And I think, everybody's playing out the chess game, maybe 1 to 2 moves ahead. But I don't think anybody has really tried to play beyond 4 or 5 moves ahead or thought about all the possibilities that could happen here. And it's kind of all still out there. There's a lot of bad things that
Hmm.
can happen. There's a lot of great things that can happen. And,
Yeah,
we will see where this all goes. But it's definitely an interesting time to be in the technology industry. And it's definitely an interesting time to be a marketer and to have the opportunity to go tell these stories of some of these newer companies especially,
mhm,
and make sure that um, we're doing a good job of using technology, but also staying true to what I think people ultimately care about, which is trust, a real sense of connection, authenticity. All these words I think are more important now than they ever have been.
for sure. 100%. Agree.
Cool. Well, listen, we're coming to the end of the show. I usually like to end with peer recommendations. So, we're all peer bound, at least in our world. And I would love to know 3 questions from you. What are you reading right now that you really
Okay.
love? Tell me that. And then what are you watching? It could be TV shows, movies. And are there any apps or new products that you've tried that you would strongly recommend to people? Those are my three
Yeah.
questions. So maybe we'll start with what are you reading?
Unfortunately, being a busy mom, I'm reading you know, brown cow, brown bear, what do you see?
Yeah.
Like my time is limited to be able to sit down and read a book. So at the end of my day, I'm sorry, I sometimes just disconnect to a screen. And so
Yeah,
I'll go
hey,
to your
that's
next
okay.
question. Is
By the way, I recommend brown
shrinking.
bear. I recommend brown bear.
There we go. We have one that slides and so it like reveals the next animal. So it's like
Ooh,
kind of an interactive print of it. It's
very
Yeah,
nice.
my 2-year-old is really entertained. Um, I think what I like to watch, I'm kind of just disconnecting after some heavy days. And so I'm resorting to shrinking on Apple TV. So that's what I like to do. And then as far as like tools, plug for Peerbound. But I'm really digging into Claude right now and trying to discover
Nice.
what it can do. And I think that's the hot one of the minute that I'm trying. But I feel like every week there's something new. So I try to understand what would be a use case for me personally and professionally, right?
Yeah,
Claude has helped the summer for my 6-year-old. So, there's that. So yeah, nothing revolutionary that people may have not heard yet, but
that's
kind of the
okay.
standard Claude and kind of going to streaming TV. Shrinking's my go-to right now.
Love it. I love that.
Yeah.
I Shrinking is on our list. We just finished. Well, didn't finish. We're watching, and we are up to date on Love Story, which is the JFK Jr.
Yes.
Carolyn Bessette
Yes.
story. That's been a lot of fun,
I just started
and
that one too. That's a good one.
a good look back at that decade in our lives. Like that. Just some of this stuff seems crazy, but it turns out it really happened.
Yeah.
And
And you're like, oh, the 90s was last year, right? Like that's what's also mind blowing when you
the,
do these like period
yes,
shows. It's like, oh yeah, that was the 90s. That was like not too long ago. And then you're like, no, that was
that's
like
right.
that was a long time ago.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I remember thinking the 80s were like true oldies, but that was 15
Yeah.
years ago. And
Yeah.
now the 90s and soon the 2000s are going to be, somebody will say, "Oh yeah, we're doing a retro party." And it'll be the 2000s and we'll be like, "What is going on?"
I know. When I was younger, that 70s show was my favorite, and that felt like it was so
Yes.
long ago. And yeah, now that's 90s show.
Yeah, I know. God. Yeah. We won't feel too badly for ourselves, but I loved your
Yeah.
recommendations. Shrinking is on our list, and so hopefully we'll get to that soon. And I think, look, Claude is a great bet because they really want it all. I think they want every
Hmm.
single use case to be resolved within
Yeah.
Cloud, and I think they have been very thoughtful about how they built different products. We use Cloud obviously at Peerbound as well. We're always trying to say, okay, like where's automation helpful versus where does it not really help us to deliver a better product, and we're constantly having conversations about quality and speed and okay, how can we get the best of both. But Cloud is a good bet, and I've definitely used it for a lot of personal things. As a parent, I think you're constantly just in planning mode, and you're
Yeah.
planning for the next trip, you're planning for the next whatever, and
Yeah.
it is very helpful on all those things. And yeah, definitely, if you're listening to this, check out Claude. Go just play around. There's a million
Yeah.
tools out. There's a million tutorials out there now. But I my advice, just go play around with it, get it to answer some questions, and then anytime you see a tab, just ask it what it does, and it'll tell you, and then you can just go see what you can do with it.
Yeah. I found myself doing that exact thing. Like, can you do this for me?
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, yes. And then I'll like do a longer prompt, right?
Yes.
Like
And the
I'm
more tools
training
you
for a
connect.
marathon.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
nice.
training for a marathon. And I was like, can you make a marathon plan for me? But like, I'm not good at like sticking to the schedule exactly. So then I was like, can you adapt it week to week? And that's kind of every week I go into Claude and be like, all right, this is what I did last week. Didn't
That's
do too
awesome.
well. Can you adjust my plan for me? Or hey, I did awesome this week. I actually worked out 4 days. Can you
That's
adjust
awesome.
it? So
Well,
yeah,
best
it's
of
pretty
luck.
cool.
Best of
Oh,
luck.
thanks.
When's the marathon?
This is embarrassing. It is in October. It's a long time away.
No,
But
I think 6 months is
I
about
kind
6 months is about right for training. For training,
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. But it's kind
that's
of
great.
like uh kind of couched to marathon a little bit. So I've done
Yeah.
marathons before. Actually did the New York Marathon when I was a different body at a younger age. But
When we were in the
trying
'90s
to get back
show.
on, yeah, when we were in the 90s show. Trying to get back at it. And so
Awesome.
set myself up by signing up for a marathon because
Love it.
that's the only way to motivate me to get
Love
back
it.
to running. So
That's awesome. Well, best of
yeah,
luck, and yeah, thank you so much again, Brittnee. Great to hear from you. Great to hear from you, and great to talk to you
yeah,
about some of the topics that are clearly on both our minds, and I think on everybody else's minds in customer marketing and beyond as well. So great to chat with you, and thanks again.
yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. And to any listener, if you want to connect and continue to chat, happy to do so. So thank
Awesome.
you again, Sunny.
Thanks, Brittnee.